Good morning. This is the sermon for Sunday, February 28th. And we are looking at the passage in Mark chapter 8, beginning with verse 31, basically. There's some before that. And of course, Jesus and his disciples, they're north of Galilee. They're up in the region of Caesarea Philippi. And Jesus has asked his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And finally, Peter says to Jesus, "You are the Messiah." The Messiah. The Christ in Greek is what it would be. Messiah or Messiach is Hebrew. And it's the same thing as Christ, or it also means anointed one. Those are interchangeable. And of course, it's who's anointed? Well, especially the King of Israel. The King of Israel. So we're looking at Mark 8, and Jesus began to teach his disciples that the Son of Man, which of course is Jesus, must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. Now, one thing you need to remember is that when he says elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, what he's talking about is the Sanhedrin. He's talking about in basically all of the Jewish authorities. The Sanhedrin are not just religious authorities, they are also secular political authorities. This is the main governing body of Judea, the province of Judea. And so he's going to be rejected, he says. I'm going to be rejected by them, and that they are going to kill him. And then after 3 days, he will rise again. And he spoke plainly about this. But then when he's finished saying that, Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. You know, after all, Peter has just said, "You are the Messiah. You are the Israeli king. You are the Israelite king. You are the one we've been waiting for." And so Peter can't accept this. He wants Jesus to be king. He wants the kingdom now. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." And this term, Satan, of course, is from Hebrew, and it literally means adversary or accuser. And, adversary. What is our adversary? Well, our primary adversary a lot of times is our own flesh, our sinfulness, our own sinful desires, our own foolishness. Our adversary is thinking in human things rather than in terms of what God has planned and what is best. We can't see the forest for the trees. Jesus calls Peter Satan because he has become his adversary. Rather than seeking to do what is right, what must be done for all the sins of the world to be paid for in order for all the people to be given the gospel, Peter is thinking in human terms, in terms of himself, in terms of this sinful world. And so in a sense, he embodies Satan. That's what Satan does. Distracts you, gets you off track. He's thinking of human things rather than eternal things, important things. He's thinking of lesser things. See, the enemy to the greatest good is not evil so much of the time, but something that's less good, right? Because it distracts us. Then Jesus called the crowd to him, along with his disciples, and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with his holy angels. Take up your cross and follow me." That is a hard saying, isn't it? Jesus didn't want to die on the cross. I mean, in a physical sense. He had to, but he didn't want to. It wasn't fun. Same way with us. We must take up our cross, and it may not be fun. It's not fun in the least. One interesting thing, though, about cross, that word cross. Literally, the word in Greek is staros. And it means, in essence, to stand. It doesn't mean cross in the sense that we think of it, but rather the word itself means like pull and to stand. And the root word can mean to stand firm, to not be moved. And I think we should think about that in terms of taking up our cross. What does it mean to take up our cross? It means to stand firm. It means to make a stand. Jesus made the ultimate stand, didn't he, when he went to the cross? That's the ultimate statement. That's the ultimate price to pay to save us from our sin. That was the stand. The stand. Jesus made the stand, but we too must stand. We must stand firm. Paul often uses this word. Not the word cross, but the word to stand firm, which is the same derivative, same word. Staros, or they both come from histemi in Greek. To stand firm. Stand firm. That's what the Apostle Paul says repeatedly. Stand firm. Stand firm. You can see it throughout his letter. Stand firm in the faith. Stand firm in the Lord. Stand firm in the power of God. And my favorite one and the best example of that, I think, is Ephesians 6, where it talks about the full armor of God. Paul says, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand. Your stand, that word, the same word. Take your stand against who? Against the devil's schemes. Against Satan's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to what? To stand your ground. And after you have done everything to stand, stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Stand firm. Make your stand. Oh, how important that is, to make your stand. Now, taking your stand may be very costly. It often is. It's taking up your cross and following Jesus. And yet, when we do that, it pays such wonderful, great, and glorious rewards. It may be costly to us, but many others can be benefited by it. And we glorify God by it. I think of, for instance, the Alamo. They made their stand at the Alamo, and they all died. And yet, because of that, the Texas Revolution succeeded. I think of the 300 Spartans who were facing the mighty Persian army, the most mighty army in the world, thousands upon tens of thousands of elite Persian troops coming against the little country or the little area of Greece. And 300 Spartans and a few others decided that they were going to stand at the pass of Thermopylae, where the Persians had to come in through. And it's just a narrow little pass, and there were only these few hundred Spartans and other Greek troops, and they made their stand at that pass. And the Persians couldn't pass for a long period of time. The battle raged. They made their stand, and eventually all the Greeks, all the Spartans and those with them, perished. They all paid with their lives. But that was so costly to the Persians that it set the stage for their defeat as a whole by the Greeks. and the Persians were sent running, and the Greeks won the battle. They saved their land from being overtaken by the mighty Persian army. Or more recently, I think of World War II, the Battle of the Bulge. Remember, that's the last great offensive of Nazi Germany, of Hitler. And so it's near Christmas time, and they make this great unexpected surprise offensive against the American and the Allied forces in the West, and they are succeeding in many ways. They're pushing out against the front lines, the American lines, the English lines, and they surround the city of Bastogne, which is being defended by the American forces. And the American forces are surrounded by huge numbers of German forces. And so the German general sends a note of surrender to General McAuliffe, the American general in command, and saying, well, you don't have any chance, you're surrounded, surrender. And to that, General McAuliffe sends the one-word answer, which is very famous. He said, nuts. In other words, forget it. Forget it. And by making that stand, by the American forces standing at Bastogne and holding out until General George S. Patton could miraculously make the long march to their aid, they put down this offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. It was the worst battle on the Western Front, worst battle for the American forces in the war. And it raged at Christmas time, towards the end of the war. And because they made their stand, the Germans did not win. Or you can contrast in World War II also, Great Britain versus France. France quickly folded when the German forces came. France quickly surrendered. But Germany, they weren't in a very good position either. They were severely outnumbered. They were in a bad position. But when they were faced with it, they would not surrender, right? In the Battle of Britain, they stood firm. They made their stand. They made their stand. They stood firm. And, World War II might have been lost if they hadn't made that stand. But they made that stand. And the world was saved from Nazism, from Nazi Germany. So let us make our stand. Let us take up our cross and make our stand. It's not easy. It's never easy to make a stand. It's never easy to take up your cross and follow Jesus. But it is the thing to do. It is the thing that God calls us to do, and there is great glory and honor in it. That is what we must do. No matter who we are, we're faced with that today. It may not be as dramatic. It may not be in a war. But rather we may have to make a stand in this adulterous generation that we're living in this sinful and adulterous generation here, where there is little respect for God or for the gospel or for anyone of faith, not just Christians but Jews or anybody else, and we may have to make a stand for that. We may have to make the stand to defend others. We may have to make the stand to defend our liberty. We may have to make the stand in countless ways, and we must do just that. Stand for the Lord. Stand firm in the Lord. Put on the full armor of God and make your stand against the devil. Amen.